Hello friends, and welcome back to my kitchen. Today we're going to be making a whole bunch of sourdough goodies. So I have my fed starter. You can see all those nice bubbles at the beginning there. And now I'm going to do what is called a pre-ferment. And the way that I do it, basically we're just double feeding this starter and getting a larger quantity of starter before we make our bread tomorrow. So I fed my starter in the morning. Now it's the evening, and we're going to do our pre-ferment. Get all those bubbles. So we're adding our starter, our active starter, to our water, which is warm. And then we're adding some more flour. And then I'm going to mix this all up and cover it and let it sit overnight to get really nice and active and bubbly. Okay, it's the next morning now, and our pre-ferment is active and ready to go. Lots and lots of bubbles, and quite a lot more than what we started with. The amount of dough that I'm making today is too much for my mixer to handle. So I'm going to divide our pre-ferment in half and make 2 batches of dough so that my mixer doesn't blow up. So I'm adding a little bit of sugar to both batches of dough, a little bit of salt, and now some warm water. And now I'm adding a flax egg to each batch of dough. I find that I prefer a flax egg in my bread versus a real egg, or you could also use some kind of fat or oil or butter. I find that the flax egg actually gives the nicest result, so that's what I like to use. And to make a flax egg, you just mix 1 tablespoon of ground flaxseed with 3 tablespoons of warm water and let it sit for about 5 minutes to gel. So I've added some flour and got my mixer going, and I'm going to slowly incorporate the rest of the flour that my recipe calls for until that dough starts pulling away from the sides of the bowl. And once I feel like I've added enough flour, I'm going to let my mixer do the kneading here for about 5 to 8 minutes, depending on how that dough looks. And as I see that dough sticking to the bowl, I can add a little bit more flour. So I'm just checking my dough here. Looks ready to go. So now I'm going to transfer this first batch of dough to a well-oiled bowl. And then I'm going to set this off to the side, covered, so that it can rise and we can work on our next batch of dough. I use a little bit of flour to help get it to release from the bowl. And I actually like to finish off by kneading a little bit by hand. And then you could see me kind of making some surface tension there by kind of pulling and twisting the dough. Now I'm going to make sure it's all oiled up before I cover it so that it doesn't stick to my cover. Where's your daddy? Did you know that's a very important part? And now we're going to go ahead and do the exact same thing to this second batch of dough. Now we're going to get started on some muffins. This recipe is out of my grandmother's 4-H cookbook that I inherited. The recipe is for blueberry muffins, but today we're going to be making them with raspberries that I picked in season and froze. Here I'm making a buttermilk substitute. I'm using oat milk, and I'm adding a few tablespoons of lemon juice, and that will act the same as adding buttermilk. Before putting these in the oven, I decided to make a crumble topping for them. So I'm just kind of eyeballing these ingredients together. I've got rolled oats, some flour, and some sugar, and then some butter. I decided I didn't make enough, so I'm mixing a little more. And I'm just going to finish mixing that with my fingers and then distribute this evenly on top of the muffins and get them baked up. While those are baking, I'm going to get started on our cinnamon rolls. So here again, I'm just kind of making this up as I go, adding whatever looks like enough cinnamon, butter, and sugar for our filling for our cinnamon buns. Adding more as I think it needs it. Our dough is completely risen. I'm just going to punch it down. Look at all those big bubbles. So this is enough for 2 loaves of bread or 2 batches of cinnamon buns or buns. So I'm going to start by dividing this in half. And 1/2 is going to become cinnamon buns, and the other half is going to become dinner rolls. And I'm just going to leave the 1/2 covered in the bowl while I work with the first half. So I'm going to shape our cinnamon bun dough here, just stretching it. Some people like to use a rolling pin for this. I like to just stretch it out on a silicone mat. Get it all a relatively even thickness. And then I'm going to put my filling on here in little pats and then mush it all out with my hands. You can use a spoon, but I prefer to use my hands to do this. And once I have that evenly spread out on there, use my bench scraper and start rolling this log up and pinch it all together. And then I have a knife and a bowl of water here, and I'm going to try and evenly cut this, starting by cutting it in half, then cutting those halves into halves, and then cutting each of those into 3 relatively, hopefully even cinnamon rolls. And then I'm going to get them placed in a greased pan. And covered up. And we'll let those keep rising and get started on shaping our dinner rolls. So this is how I prefer to shape my dinner rolls, is just kind of flatten them out in a circle and then pull all the edges into the middle until you've built enough surface tension. You don't want the dough to start ripping. If the dough starts to rip, you are done building surface tension. You don't need any more surface tension. So I'm just going to get these all shaped up and covered and let them rise as well. And get started on our second batch of dough, which I'm also going to divide, and this is going to become 2 loaves of dough. Our first loaf is going to go into a loaf pan. So I'm just going to shape our loaf here. This is how I like to do it. I'm going to make this one with some herbs. I use some garlic powder and some rosemary, and then I'm just going to use some olive oil to create a little something nice in that. I like to save the wrappers that my butter comes in and use them to grease my loaf pans or whatever I'm baking in. There's our first loaf. And now our second loaf, I am going to be baking in the Dutch oven. So again, just building surface tension in a similar way that we did with our dinner rolls. Our muffins are out of the oven. They look so good. And they were so, so good. I need to make these again. That was my first time doing that recipe. And now our bread can go into the oven. Just putting a little bit more seasonings on top here. So I like to be a little extra. And I wish I would have added more seasonings into the dough for this loaf. I found that the flavor was really quite mild. So here we're going to get our Dutch oven loaf scored while our other loaf is in the oven. I'm just pinching some of the bubbles on the surface here. And I'm just doing a simple circle as our score today. And here's what everything looked like. Our loaf was beautiful. Our muffins were so, so good. The rolls, I wish I would have had the oven a little bit hotter. They didn't get as golden as I was hoping. But the cinnamon buns came out perfect, and I just made a simple glaze. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time, friends.